Hey, my name is Enda Murray and I'm the director of the Irish Film Festival. I'm delighted to be joined tonight by the director of Mrs. Robinson, Aoife Kelleher, and by Mrs. Mary Robinson herself, who needs no introduction. Mary and Aoife, tá fáilte romhaibh chuig an Austral. You're very welcome to the Q&A. Aoife, first of all, just could you tell us how this film came about?
Well, I first met with Cormac Hargadon, who produced the film in 2018, and he told me that he was going to pitch a documentary to Mary Robinson, and he was hoping that I would be involved, and I was delighted. And we put together our proposal for a documentary. And I think we were, as it turned out, we were pitching against at least two other companies, I think, which I suppose isn't very surprising at all, considering Mary's life and career and how significant it has been, in Ireland and globally. So I think that Mary since said that she, what appealed to her about our pitch was the idea of, discussing every aspect of her life and her work and her personal mission, and, in particular climate justice, and the fact that we were going to take a kind of warts and all approach. So, I mean, there was so much that Mary wanted to talk about, and that I think we were all delighted with that approach, and that was something that appealed to Mary. So, after putting together the funding, we began filming during lockdown with a series of interviews with Mary, and it really took off from there.
Grant. Mary, there's a sequence in the film where you just talk about sitting on the floor with a professor in Harvard, and teasing out the question, what is the law? So in 1968, when you went to Harvard, the USA seemed to be a very hopeful and exciting place for you. I was interested in your thoughts about USA at the moment, and as you mentioned about the place of women's rights going backwards. I know we've only got 20 minutes, but where do you see a way forward with the USA?
It really is both surprising and truly shocking to see what is happening in the United States under the Trump administration. Rule of law going backwards domestically and also being undermined internationally. And as you say, when I studied law in Harvard, I felt this was the strongest country for democracy, the best Supreme Court, the most wonderful teaching of law. I was so privileged to be there, and loved being part of the international master's program that I was taking. Even that is now being squeezed and under threat in Harvard and other universities, not wanting students from outside the United States. The whole ethos, the whole sense of what we were about is being so undermined by the day that it's hard to believe. It's hard to credit that a Trump administration could so poison what is everything good about America in its international role for democracy, for humanitarian issues, etc., all now undermined. And domestically, the power grab that's going on, even within their own cities, and on the issue of migration. In the film, I was talking about women's rights because it was before President Trump was reelected, and none of this was evident, but I could see that there was the beginnings of his Supreme Court, in the sense of the courts that he's now appointed the majority of judges to, was rowing back on women's rights. So that was a sort of sign of things to come, but we never imagined it could be as bad as it is. It is the worst of the worst now, and we have to fight back.
Good. Look, I was interested to know from your own position, what was it like to be the subject of such a far-reaching documentary on your life? What was that experience like?
Well, I didn't want to have a film made about me. We had a wonderful presidency. I was very busy with other parts of my life, especially for the elders. And I told Bride Rosny No, I don't need a film. And she said, no, Mary, you've had a good life. You've done some good things. You've made mistakes. We'll put those in as well. And people need to know about that part of our history. And of course, she was right. I mean, I see now very clearly, it's actually very important that people can see how Ireland developed. And I was a part of that development because I was lucky enough to be the first woman president, to be president in the 90s when I was. And, the opening up that then reflected two wonderful referenda that young people in Ireland fought so hard for on same-sex marriage and on removing the prohibition on abortion in our constitution. These were really important moments, and they all, I think, showed how a country can move forward. And what we're seeing, sadly, in the United States is how quickly and worryingly a country can move backwards.
Aoife, for yourself, what's the challenges of making a documentary with such a distinguished person and someone who has squeezed in so much? One, where do you start? And two, how do you fit it all in?
Yeah, I mean, that is the big challenge of making a documentary with someone whose life has been so multifaceted, encompassing so many different battles around kind of human rights, around climate justice, around women's rights and reproductive rights. And, from the very beginning, there were so many aspects to, Mary's life and work, her work as a senator, her work as a really kind of pioneering lawyer, her political life, and the presidential campaign. I mean, there was so much. There really was enough to make a fascinating series. So, the editing process and, the question of what to include. And, there were so many aspects that I was really passionate about. I would have, that we had amazing archive around, the divorce referendum, around, the Eighth Amendment. And, Mary was really quite visionary then in her debates around the Eighth Amendment when it was enacted, and, describing in detail what was going to happen as a result, and essentially describing, what would, the circumstances of the X case, and so there was so much that that wasn't in that I would have loved to include. And I know it really meant a lot to Mary that, that we would capture her life today, her work with the elders, her work around climate justice. So it was just, about striking that balance. And, I'll never, there are always aspects that, that I would have loved to include. And, and people constantly ask, I mean, whether it's about, visiting the Vatican and, or, aspects of kind of her career today, or, even kind of aspects of the presidential campaign. People always have these moments that, that they would have loved to have seen too. So I guess it's just, it's about trying to encapsulate as much of an extraordinary life and an extraordinary career.
Great. Look, myself, I left Ireland in '85. But one of the things in the film that resonated with me, and I know resonates with a lot of people in Australia, was the focus on the diaspora and the beautiful idea of the candle in the window. I think a lot of us emigrants felt often that we were forgotten about, and that was something in your presidency that really stayed with me. What was it that inspired the focus on the diaspora for you?
It was a very serious focus because as a senator, I had visited immigrant centres in the United Kingdom, in Boston, in other parts of the States, in Canada, and in Australia during a long, 20 years in the Senate at one time or another. And always the centres were doing wonderful work, completely underfunded, completely ignored by Ireland. And I was aware that a great poet friend of mine, Evan Boland, wrote a poem about the Irish immigrant. And the first line is, "We put them out like lamps in the dark." We forgot them. And I was determined that as president, I was going to try to make connection between the Ireland of today, the Ireland I was president of, and the diaspora, to enrich both. I totally underestimated the light, to be honest. It took on a life of its own. I never mentioned it, as I never got to mention it when Nick and myself went on our state visits or any other visits, because we were always greeted by, we know you have a light in the window and how much it matters. And I realized, it is so deeply personal to people to feel that connection. And of course, once we built that shaped Irish diaspora, the policies came. We have very good policies now. They followed that sense of being guided by the light, if you like.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. I have a memory. My dad was from Belmullet in County Mayo, and going back as a child, and by the time I'm from Drogheda, but by the time we'd get to Belmullet, it would be dark. But you could see the little lights on the houses on the hillsides, and it wasn't like Drogheda, everybody together. It was these little villages. So yeah, really.
Christmas time, the candles were very visible.
Yes, it was a beautiful thing. In the film, you talk about the concept of climate justice, and you talk about Project Dandelion. Can you update us with what's been happening recently with Project Dandelion?
Yes, well, Project Dandelion promotes climate justice, so it brings together, and climate justice is about having a people-centered approach, caring about the people who are affected by the climate shocks and nature being affected by the climate shocks. And Project Dandelion is all about women's leadership in this. One of the problems we have in the world today is we have predominance of male leadership, quite a lot of it being very authoritarian and increasingly populist, increasingly, grabbing power for the sake of power. If we had more balanced leadership, more women leading countries, we would have a better situation. So Project Dandelion is all about women's leadership at every level, in particular also at the grassroots, indigenous, young leaders level. And that's where you build up the important ways of showing a different kind of approach to how we live together, how we are humans together, how we affirm each other, love each other, for goodness sake. We're humans together. We've too much negativity, too much darkness in our world. And Project Dandelion is trying to bring that sense of what it is to be human and how wonderful it is if we can be humans together in a very positive way.
You have received many accolades in your time. The one that struck me was the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2018. Do you want to tell us about your own experience of that?
Yes, that was a special honor, I must say. It was unexpected. It was the first giving of that Medal of Freedom, Presidential Medal of Freedom, by President Obama. And there were a number of very distinguished people. Archbishop Tutu was there. Ted Kennedy was honored. A great list to be included in, as well as everything else. And I felt very affirmed by the way he, spoke about my work in particular on behalf of the hunters and the poor.
That another thing in the film was the Elders, which was not a group that I was familiar with, but I was delighted to see it. So it's such a wonderful idea. I suppose here in Australia with the Indigenous community, there's a big focus on elders, and I was wondering how that has been going since the film has been made.
Well, the elders were brought together by Nelson Mandela in 2007, and he asked us to help him with his legacy. He was 89 at the time. We were launched on his 89th birthday, and I was at a planning meeting before that where he spoke about what he really wanted us to do. And he said very simple things. He said, I want you to work for peace and human rights and a sustainable planet for everyone. And I also want you to be humble. And when you go anywhere, listen, because people there know far more about that place than you might. So just sit and listen before you say anything. And it was really good advice. And I think we've tried to do that It's a great privilege to be part of the elders. I was at the Rafah crossing recently with Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand and former head of the UN Development Agency. So we had both UN experience and leadership experience. And we were there to talk about what was happening at this crossing, which was very silent, actually. On one side, you had people desperately trying to get food and humanitarian aid across the border. And on the other side, you had 2 million people not getting that aid because most of it was being turned back. 70% of it was not being received by the Israelis, was sent back for stupid reasons or no reason. And people were starving, people were dying of lack of medical care. And it was heartbreaking to be there. And just to be a voice for those who can't have that voice is what the elders are about. And it's such a privilege at this stage in my life. My father had a great saying that it's much better to wear out than to rust out. And I'm determined to wear out, not to rust out.
Great. It's great that you mentioned Gaza. I attended a famine memorial here 3 weeks ago, and I think we have a special relationship with famine. My dad in Belmullet, through his own family, had told me stories. He didn't say a lot about his growing up, but he did tell me stories about people wandering with green around them out from eating grass. But the famine has a special place for Irish people, and a man-made famine even more. And to make the connection, whether it's Ireland or Sudan or Palestine or Gaza, I think is very important, and respect you for making that. It's very difficult in Australia to say these things. If I was going to ask, what do you think people what would you like them to take away from the film?
I mean, I think that the transformation of Ireland that is captured in the film is very optimistic, and at a time where, as Mary is saying, we're seeing kind of, progress being reversed, rights being taken away, and other, global issues like, Gaza and the treatment of the Palestinians. And I think that, if we consider, I mean, anyone who remembers how, practically theocratic Ireland was, and how kind of male dominated, and how few opportunities there were for kind of diverse voices in Irish society. I think that the message that things can change, that things can transform, if people really fight for it, I think is one that's very, very optimistic. And also, I think that there's also a powerful message in relation to kind of, women taking on leadership roles. It's never easy. I mean, it was very difficult in Ireland in the late 80s and 1990, and it's difficult now for different reasons. I think social media can make it very difficult for women. I think that there's a lot of kind of negativity and personal remarks, and downright misogyny. But nevertheless, it's really important for women to step up and to take on these leadership roles, because in relation to the climate, in relation to so many other issues, we're really running out of time.
Yeah. You mentioned about the theocracy, and I read about when you made your application for Trinity College that you needed a letter from Charles McQuaid, of all people.
My father went and had a glass of sherry with the Archbishop McQuaid. And because we were a rural family, we were from the west of Ireland, from County Mayo, the Archbishop didn't mind. It was Dublin families he didn't want to go to Trinity. And a few years later, he removed the stigma of a mortal sin. I'm not sure what it means to remove things. Once they're a mortal sin one week, and then the next week they're not a mortal sin, but that was what he did. And my youngest brother, Adrian, didn't need any glass of sherry to go to Trinity.
Yes. I went to Trinity myself, 78 to 82. I didn't have the letter, luckily. Look, I'd love to chat longer, but we're running out of time. But it's an incredible honour for me to talk to you. I'm absolutely delighted, and it's a great film that you've made, and it's just such a fitting tribute to yourself, Mary, and all of the work that you've done as one of 14 children from Drogheda. I think I was very happy to see those changes, and to come to Australia, and then to look back and to see Ireland, with marriage equality before Australia. It does make you think things can change, and that's a wonderful thing. So, you were last in Australia in 2002, Mary. Any chance you might come back again?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about it. It is a rather long way, but you're going to have, hopefully, a conference on climate next year. Australia is the lead country that's likely to host that conference, maybe in Adelaide. And I will certainly be there if that's the case. So that's an excellent reason to return. And I really hope that people will enjoy the film and take something away about making a difference themselves. Everybody can help to make a little bit of difference in our lives. And that's really has motivated me for most of my life, that everybody matters and everybody can make a bit of difference. You can bring a bit of light into the world. Do your best.
Fantastic. Gurumila Mayagat, Mary and Aoife, thanks a million for taking the time to do the Q&A, and good luck with the film. And Mary, I hope I see you next year in Australia. You'll be very welcome. Gurumila Mayagat, Slán agus Banach.
Gurmagat.
Enda.